All right, in this explainer, we're jumping right in and breaking down the central arguments from a political commentary called Supreme Victory, which comes from the YouTube channel Liberal Hivemind. We're going to go through their claims slide by slide.
So the video kicks things off with a pretty bold question. After listing out what it sees as the country's biggest problems, debt, border security, losing industry, and corruption, it throws out this challenge. Has anyone confronted these things more head-on than Trump?
And that question really sets up the entire argument of the video. The core idea here isn't just that he's the only one trying to tackle these problems, but, and this is key, that the policies he's put in place are actually getting results.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. The first major pillar of their argument is all about the national deficit. The video makes a point of saying this was a huge issue for critics, who, it claims, have suddenly gone quiet about it. And the whole economic case really boils down to this one number, $600 billion. The source points to a presentation by Kevin Hassett, a former top economic advisor, who projects this as a massive reduction in the deficit year over year. Now, what's really interesting here is how the source says that $600 billion is achieved. It's not from just one thing. It's presented as this perfectly balanced three-part strategy. About a third of it comes from spending cuts, another third from new money brought in by tariffs, and the final third from economic growth that they say was sparked by the tax cuts.
So, you might be wondering, how do they justify these pretty aggressive policies like the tariffs? Well, the video uses this quote to frame the whole situation as a national emergency. The argument is, look, when you have a crisis like fentanyl or when trade deficits are hollowing out towns, you can't just stick to business as usual.
And that idea of an emergency is super important because it leads right into their next point. The video argues that you can't just look at any one of these policies by itself. You have to see it as a bigger, coordinated plan, where every piece is designed to work together.
So, what is this strategy? Well, the video lays it out as a simple three-step process. First, you use tariffs to get a handle on trade. Second, you use tax cuts to get the economy growing at home, and the ultimate goal of all of it? Step 3, shrink that trade deficit and hopefully bring some of those jobs back.
What this does is create a really stark contrast. On one side, the video paints what it calls the status quo as just doing the same failed things over and over. And on the other side, it presents the current approach as something new, actively identifying problems and then using complex, multi-part strategies to actually try and solve them.
Okay, so this leads us to the next big theme in the video, this idea of outperforming the experts. A huge part of the narrative is that these policies aren't just working, they're working in spite of all the dire warnings from economists and the media.
And this slide really captures that core conflict perfectly. It's this constant back and forth they present. Here's what the experts supposedly said would happen, and here's what the video claims is actually happening. For every prediction of economic doom, the source serves up a counterpoint that it says proves them wrong. So how do they build this whole experts versus results idea? Well, first, they show you the skeptical take. The video's point here is that when opponents are faced with what looks like good news, they just move the goalpost and say something like, well, it's just too soon to know for sure. And then, right after that, they hit you with this quote, which they frame as a sort of grudging admission of defeat from the media. The narrator's interpretation is that even the critics are starting to admit, maybe reluctantly, that these policies might actually be working and could lead to things like an uptick in hiring.
So where does all this lead? What's the final takeaway from the source material? Well, it wraps everything up by moving from these individual arguments to just a big, sweeping list of what it calls clear-cut successes. And they present this list as the final scorecard. The argument is that if you look at everything from the economy to foreign policy to domestic issues like the border, this list is the proof that this is the first administration in a long, long time to really take on the country's biggest challenges.
And really, the whole argument gets boiled down to this one very simple idea of what a worthwhile politician is. And according to this definition, someone who sees a problem and genuinely tries to fix it, the source claims that Donald Trump is the only recent leader who even qualifies.
And that leaves us with a big question that's really at the core of this entire commentary. How are we supposed to judge if a policy is successful? Do we listen to the experts and their predictions, or do we look at the results claimed on the ground? The source video definitely picks a side. For them, it's all about the results.